And we are continuing our work on the Series 5000 for students. And hopefully everybody had a chance to look at the agenda and look at this policies that we're going to be reviewing. We're going to be starting with policy 5114, students suspension, expulsion. Well, actually, the renamed students suspension and expulsion due process, which we already sent to the board for first read, and they sent it back with some questions about further review. So let's open that up for a conversation now, if we could.
Sure. So I believe it was Mr. Janelli at the board meeting had recommended that this go back to the policy committee. There was two things that he recommended. One was considering adding a reference within the policy to the code of conduct, which we can certainly do. And the second was bullying. Consider adding to this policy a line or recommendation on bullying, which again, we can certainly discuss. I do just want to, it is our last agenda item, but Kate, if you're okay with me skipping to that, I think it'll give some context to this recommendation. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to scroll down to this item number 2 on the agenda, which is the discussion. There is a policy that will come up next month at our May policy meeting, and we'll devote a significant amount of time as it is a new state statute and requirement. It's the Connecticut School Climate Policy. I think it's just important that we all review it together so that we fully understand. But this policy was put together by the state representatives, by the state board in conjunction with different organizations. Its intent is meant to replace the bullying policy and be more encompassing. So the reason why I'm sharing this is we may not want to put a recommendation to reference bullying or the bullying policy, is it's going to be redefined by this new policy that I think you're going to find to be much more expensive. So I will open it up for discussion, but I just wanted to share both those things.
Thank you, Kelly. Committee members, any thoughts on this?
If it's going to be in next month, then postpone it and see what we get. Is that what you would recommend? Postpone it and see what comes down the pike? Or
Is it okay if I respond to that? I was not recommending postponing the review of this policy as we went over it extensively. There was just those two comments. What I would not recommend though is a reference to the bullying policy. Is that still up for revision? And I do think that that new policy, the school climate policy, will be much more extensive and will tie in very nicely to this revision.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I think the other question is, do we want to embed a reference to the code of conduct in the policy? That would just be the other question.
Is there a place that you feel like it might be suited to do that?
I saw it in there.
In the existing one? Or,
No,
I'm sorry.
no, in the proposed one.
Sorry, Juanita, I didn't see your hand up there.
Oh,
Go
no,
ahead.
that's okay. I'll wait. Go ahead, Teresa.
No, I'm sorry, Juanita. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. In reviewing the policy that we have had moved to the board, I think it was something about district. I'm sorry, I can't see the fine print, but I think can we enlarge that a little bit, Kelly? Thanks.
Is that better?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there was wording in there that talked about district policies, but I don't think that here it is, the second paragraph, expected to comply with school rules and board policies. And I think that when it was sent back to our committees, the question that I had before I tell you the wording that I thought we might introduce is each school, Kelly, that you might know of, are they required to post some type of behavioral code?
Yes.
And do we have, excuse me, a Danbury Public School code of conduct?
For the middle and high school level, you do. For the elementary level, there are behavioral guidelines and expectations, and that is actually up for review. We more recently did the middle and high school, but there is one for every level. The elementary could use some revision.
Okay, so having looked at that, I did think that we needed to perhaps talk about embedding something a bit more specific, as we've talked all year, especially for people who have been a part of the expulsion process. So this is not written in stone, and it may not even be written correctly, but hopefully you'll get the idea. And so I will even say, high school and middle school students are expected to comply with Danbury Public Schools Code of Conduct, as introduced to and reviewed with parents and students throughout the school year. The Danbury Public Schools Code of Conduct is posted in each public school building and on the district website.
Ms. Harris, can I just ask, are you thinking that that would come as a paragraph kind of following this second one, right before it says policy objectives?
I think it would come after.
Like
Um,
right here?
Right. Now, again, I'm looking for some feedback. We had continued throughout the sessions talking about the code of conduct. Were parents aware, or students may not be aware, and so perhaps just emphasizing that it is introduced to and reviewed by parents and students throughout the school year. If we have a code of conduct that we would post on our website, and again, probably targeting middle and high school. And as you said, we're revising something for elementary.
I like the idea of pulling all those things together, Juanita. And like you said, emphasizing the way in which this information is conveyed. It just sort of keeps us consistent. Other committee members? Non-committee members, any thoughts on the suggestion by Ms. Harris?
I'm just trying to wrap my mind around it. Yes, we do have a code of conduct. How can we put this? I don't know. I just see we're sort of doing the same thing over and over. But how, parents know, students know that we have a code of conduct, and however the administration decides to initiate that, when they first day of school, second month in the school, I don't know. I wrestle with this because I don't understand where we're going, and maybe that's me.
So perhaps, Gladys, are we looking to be more specific of when, how often? I think we have the why in paragraph 1, but are we looking to be more specific with how often it's reviewed, how we get it out, or does that come? That's what I meant to ask. Does that come in the second, where you have how it will be addressed, how the policy is addressed by the administration?
That typically, like if we wanted to say it would be done 4 times or 6 times a year, that would be in the regulations.
Right.
But I think a reference to the fact that it is available and regularly reviewed would be appropriate for the policy.
I also, while we were sitting here, I just pulled up the Danbury High School website has it right in the pull down menu in their second one over. So to your point, I think the language is terrific that you're talking about, Juanita. And I think, basically what you're trying to do is wrap your arms around what they've already got posted on their websites. So I think it's a really good idea. And that way, if it's on their websites, but you make reference to it here, then we can continue to update on the individual sites, but this is kind of like the wraparound that references it. I also, timing's everything. And one of the things that we're doing right now is we're looking at all the mandatory postings for the new building. And so that's causing us to look at everything we've got posted in all of the main offices of all of our buildings. So this is kind of a timely reminder that this is another piece that really needs to be prominently displayed in the main offices and in the schools.
Juanita, would you read? Thank you. Thank you all for the conversation. Juanita, could you read the addition that you were proposing again, and maybe we could just fill that in and sort of take a look at it together?
Okay. Again, I want to be specific to middle school and high school. So middle school, Danbury Public School, middle school students and high school students are expected to comply with the Danbury Public School Code of Conduct. I didn't know if Kelly was, okay.
I'm
The-
trying just while
I
it's,
know, that's why.
I had to take it down. It's not keeping up. Give me 1 second, please.
Mhm.
Okay, so you had middle school and high school students will be expected.
To comply with the Danbury Public School Code of Conduct as introduced to and reviewed with parents and students throughout the school year.
Mhm.
The Danbury Public School Code of Conduct is posted in each public school building and on the Danbury and on the district website.
Actually, it looks like they're posted on all of the individual. I can see the Broadview's got a reference to the middle school code. West Side's got it. I'm just looking at Rogers Park and the high school. Kelly, are there requirements in this new climate law about posting codes of conduct?
I believe there is, and I don't recall I know there's requirements. I don't recall if it's explicitly stated in the policy, Kim. I'd need to verify.
Committee members, how does that look to everyone?
It looks good.
Gladys, Louisa, did you want to add anything here?
No.
Okay. Juanita, thanks for the suggestion.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Are there any other aspects of this policy that the committee would like to consider before we send it back to the board for? Will it be another first read? Because it came back to committee, or will it go to a second read?
That's a good question. Kim, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm spitballing a little bit on this, but I think that since this is kind of an injection of a new paragraph, it makes sense to do a first read and a second read. I suspect the standard is probably, is there a big change to it? And I think that, also I think this is a good change, that to give people an opportunity to talk about it is a good thing.
Absolutely. Okay. All right, I am looking for a motion from the committee to recommend this policy, this revised policy, 5114, students suspension and expulsion due process, to the full board for a first read. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Juanita. May I have a second, please?
Oh, is that me?
That's you.
Yes. Okay. Second.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Terry. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, motion so carries. Thank you. All right, we are going to move down to policy 5125, students, records and confidentiality.
Thank you. So this next policy is all about FERPA, which is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which speaks to our district obligation to protect the confidentiality of students' records. That we have to give students and parents access to their own records, the opportunity to correct a mistake if one so exists, the opportunity to receive copies, inspect the records, and then we need explicit consent to share records with a third-party provider. And that consent is from the parent or legal guardian, and then at the age of 18 does turn over to the student. The other piece that this policy references is this idea of directory information, which allows us to distribute some information like demographic information like name, telephone number, address. Think about it when the elementary school teacher, for example, wants to send out the class list for Valentine's or things like that. Or when you need to post, class rankings or things like that on a graduation brochure. It does give us an opportunity to do some of those types of things, or not class rankings, I apologize, like honors, high honors, those types of things. It gives us the option to do that. Annually, we do need to notify parents if there is a reason that they don't want their child to be in that directory information distribution, and then they have the right to say no to that. But this policy really mimics state statute and guidelines on our obligations regarding student records and the importance of confidentiality.
So before we get the conversation going, Terry did raise an interesting point about whether or not we want information to be included, like birthday and birthplace, given privacy concerns that exist now. Can we just clarify, though, if I'm reading this correctly, it's not that we're necessarily going to include this information, but we're given the option of including this information?
Correct. It allows us, that is the limited information that we are allowed to disclose without explicit consent. But every parent has the right, if they so choose, to tell us it's an opt-out. We do not want our child to be included in directory information, and then we would withhold them from that. And that opportunity to opt out of directory information occurs every year.
So is the practice then to typically disclose date and place of birth, or is that not typically information that we disclose?
Those are examples of the type of information. I would say that is less common. Commonly names, telephone numbers, email contacts, things like that tend to be more common in nature.
Thank you. Committee, any thoughts on?
I was
Sorry,
just saying,
Kim.
I suspect it comes from, the classroom that wants to celebrate a birthday. So that's
Okay.
where the child's birthday would be disclosed.
Can
Okay.
I say that I thought they don't celebrate birthdays anymore in
I
classrooms?
think we have non-food celebrations now,
Y-
right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And I know it does seem like a lot of information. The directory information, though, is not defined by us. That is defined by statute. And so I do think what's really important here is if you do not wish to have that information or any type of information disclosed on your child, and there are certainly situations in which it would be appropriate for a parent or guardian to request, you have the opportunity to opt out. But the onus is on the family to complete that. Otherwise, it is assumed that we have the right to do so.
Are they asked once a year specifically? We have this information. Do you
There's an
still want it?
there's an annual notification every year to families that, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions about this policy or concerns about this policy? Non-committee members? All right, I'm looking for a motion then to pass policy 5125, student records and confidentiality, for a first read to the board.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Terry. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Juanita. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion so carries. Thank you. All right, moving on down to 5125.11, health and medical records. Kelly, thank you.
Yep, this one is also very similar. It basically says we also collect health information on students. And as you know, there are required years upon entry into school and then at specific grade levels throughout a child's school career that we are required by state statute to get updated health and physical examination information to ensure health and safety of students. That includes things like vaccination records, any conditions like an allergy that the school needs to be aware of, a seizure disorder, and so forth. Here, what the policy is really outlining is in the educational space, medical records are considered under FERPA, so they're considered school records. And so we follow the rules similar to the previous policy on disclosing that. And there's just an added lens or expectation that health information on a child is really distributed to those on a need to know basis. So for example, I'll use the allergy. It is important that we inform teachers that are going to be in the care of that student that the child has an allergy. So that would be appropriate information to share. There are other examples of information that would not be as needed to know by all. It might be something for the school nurse to know, that if the child came with a complaint that, for example, they had a medical procedure, a surgical procedure as a younger child, that might not be important information for everyone to know. And so we do it on a need to know basis and protecting student confidentiality throughout, but that in the educational space, those records do also fall under FERPA.
Thank you. Questions from committee members? Just a quick question, Kelly. Who would generally make the assessment of who needs to know?
Sure. Typically that is done by the school nurse. So every single year, they go over things like allergies are very, very common, things like seizure disorders and so forth. And any child that has a medical condition that teachers or other supervising staff members need to be aware of, there is a care plan that is created by the school nurse for that individual. And if there's a
Thank you,
question earlier, sorry, one other thing, Carrie Burke, who is the coordinator of health and nursing services for the district, if there is a question, she is the person that is at the head of the nursing department that would advise or make a decision on situations like that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any questions or concerns from committee members or non-committee members? All right, may I have a motion then to move forward to the full board for a first read, policy 5125.11, students' health medical records.
So moved.
Thank you, Juanita. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Terry. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion so carries. All right, we're going to keep moving. Policy 5131.1, bus conduct.
So this policy is focused around student behavior on the school buses. That appropriate behavior also applies to ridership on our school buses, and failure to do so could lead to disciplinary action similar to disciplinary action that's given in the school for inappropriate behavior on school buses. So it's just setting the expectation that student conduct and behavior does extend beyond the four walls of the school, and the school bus being most explicitly stated in this policy.
Thank you very much. Committee members, any questions about this policy?
Excuse me.
Non-committee members, any questions about this policy? Okay. In that case, I'm looking for a motion from the committee to make a recommendation for first read of policy 5131.1, students' bus conduct.
So moved.
Teresa, you make the motion. Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Juanita, for the second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion so carries. Thank you. All right, I appreciate the speed at which we're making progress here. Let's move on to policy 5131.6, alcohol use, drugs, and tobacco.
So this policy further extends, it links directly with the discipline policy, but it further details out different substances, alcohol, drugs, and tobacco that are not permitted in the school environment. It goes very explicitly into stating all the different areas that are banned, or types of substances that are not permitted, and that use of these substances or possession of these substances on school grounds or any school-related activity or event, field trip, after-school activity, those types of things are strictly prohibited and subject to the discipline policy, which is the suspension expulsion one we just reviewed, 5114.
Other
And,
questions? Go ahead, Terry.
what's the difference between the old one and the new one?
So this policy really does update a little bit more on cannabis use. I think with some of the changes in state legislation, that's a little bit more explicit. And it does expand some of the inhaled substance inhalants and things like that. So I think it's just trying to bring it a little bit more into current times of different substances that that people have seen, unfortunately, youth, having access or experimentation with.
Thank you.
Other questions? I do want to note at the bottom of this policy, there is an optional to add to the policy, use of CBD products. And I'm curious as to the committee's interest in including some of this alternate language. It is an extensive policy, isn't it?
Yes. And it's actually the two set, and thank you, Kate. I appreciate you bringing that up. There's the alternate language under cannabis use and then the alternate language under CBD use as well. If the one you just referenced right here, this entire section is optional to add to the policy. So you can pick the first paragraph, the second paragraph, or both if you so choose.
Whoa.
It is not required. This is something for consideration.
So, in thinking back about one of the expulsion hearings I was in, the student was using marijuana, but that was not the offense because it's now legal in Connecticut. But as the paragraph above says, it's still illegal under federal law. So I'm just confused.
So I think with the changes in regulations related to marijuana usage, I think it's very important to note that that is for adults and it's outside the school environment. So the way we've described it to parents is no different than alcohol. It is not illegal for a person 21 or older to purchase an alcoholic beverage, for example, but to utilize that in school or have a student have access to it and bring it into the school environment, it's strictly prohibited and subject to discipline, regardless of age. And so this I think is just further highlighting that regardless of state laws outside of the educational environment, we have no tolerance for substance use on school grounds, possession or use, and it is subject to discipline. So I think that's really where this is trying to be very, very explicit and tighten the parameters for student safety and well-being in the school setting.
But will the school still use marijuana use in school as a reason for in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension? I mean, that was not the impression I got at one of the expulsion hearings I was in.
So typically, right now we see a lot of the e-cigarette usage, and that is typically done with some out-of-school suspension time, the first offense with progressive discipline. There's also an education component that we want to make sure, parents are included in that, students receive information on, how badly it can be for them. And then sometimes with parent consent, there is even linkage with outside programs that can help, if this is a problem that the student is exhibiting on a regular basis. So you know, it's not an automatic expulsion if that's what you're asking, but certainly subject to progressive discipline.
I love that term. Thank you. I love that term, progressive discipline. I'm sorry, I'm too old.
So Kate, can I pop in?
Absolutely, Juanita, go ahead.
So at the end of the document, I do like the alternate language. But I also like in the box, students are prohibited from being under the influence of any control. So under the influence, but I think that we have to put in there that where it's and also prohibited while the student is on the school bus, at school, school grounds. So prohibited from being under the influence of any controlled drugs, narcotic substance, mind altering, while a student on our school, Danbury Public School bus, school grounds, school-sponsored activity.
Um,
Am I repeating? Is there something already in there?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the same thing you are, that you're
So,
reading out the language out of the box. Is that correct?
so will we discipline a student, even using progressive discipline, having found them to be under the influence?
You're asking if we do that.
Yes, would we, and I think Kelly kind of answered that, but that was to Teresa's question of it came up at an expulsion, but that was not the reason for the expulsion. So moving away from expulsion a little bit, I believe we are saying that students are we would want students to be prohibited from being under the influence of any controlled drug, narcotic, etc. Especially while on, well, yeah, especially while on school bus, school grounds, school events. But what does that lead to? Does that lead to some disciplinary action? And if it's habitual, then what happens? Do we move to suspension, expulsion?
So in the language right above that, and Kelly, I don't know if you're certainly welcome to jump in and take control of this, but I'm looking at that language right above the box, which talks
Yeah.
about, if district officials have reasonable belief that a student may be under the influence in possession of or distributing. Now this is specific to medical marijuana, so I don't know, if we need something broader. I'm just trying to pan up through this now to take a look and see. Because I guess marijuana or cannabis, would be covered by the part of the policy that's above, correct?
Yeah, this section of the policy is specific to medical marijuana, but what you will find is throughout this policy, it is a very similar reference that subject to disciplinary action, including criminal. So I think, Juanita, to answer your earlier question, it is part, any substance use or abuse is part of the code of conduct and is subject to discipline, and that is typically progressive discipline. I also think in some of these situations, understanding the why behind it, engaging the student in some type of counseling services, possibly tapping into outside resources, is also advantageous to the student, but certainly, the discipline is allowed to be, increasing in nature if there are multiple offenses.
And so addressing this policy by the administration, school staff, that would be in the regulations?
It would be in the code of conduct.
Teresa?
How do you know that there's no testing for marijuana? I mean, how can you determine that?
So our school resource officers actually do have test kits when a student is using something like an e-cigarette. You can dip it and they can tell if it is positive for THC. So there is a
Ooh,
go about it, yes.
ooh, we're cutting edge.
That's the extent of my knowledge on that.
Thank you.
So in terms of this alternate language that's available at the bottom here, for both the medical marijuana section as well as the use of CBD products, what is the appetite of the committee? Do we want to include this information? Do we want to use one version versus the other?
I think we should use something. What? Leave it to the committee. Um,
So I feel like the language for the CBD products might be a little bit easier for us to tackle since it's shorter. So let's take a quick look at that. And we're talking about, the two paragraphs that are there. The first paragraph is one option, and then the second paragraph is the other option. So let's take a look and read those. And then if you could provide your feedback. Kelly, do you have any thoughts you want to weigh in on?
No, the other option, just to add, there's three, you can use either paragraph or you can eliminate it in its
Or not
entirety.
include.
The CBD is not required for this policy.
Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate that. So Terry, Juanita, any thoughts on which of the three options we think was the one we should make a recommendation for?
I like the first paragraph. And in there where it says consistent with federal law, Substance Act, Drug-Free School, Communities Act, the use and or possession of. And
So actually, I'm sorry, Juanita, we're looking at the two paragraphs underneath as they relate to the use of CBD products.
oh, not below. Okay, so what I'm
Correct, yeah.
thinking is can we use okay, so just those two. I see them
Yes.
highlighted, but
And our options being to include paragraph 1, to include paragraph 2, or to not include either paragraph.
I think the first paragraph is more succinct. But it doesn't matter to me.
I think I like the second paragraph only because it does say legal or illegal or legal, regardless of the amount. Yeah, so that I would go.
Okay, I'd go with Juanita. That's fine with me.
What do you
Non-committee
think? What are you
Sorry,
thinking, Kate?
I'm amenable to either. I will say that I know that there are muscle bombs that now use CBD. And so I'm thinking specifically about kids who might be involved in sports that are looking to maybe use a topical if they have an injury or a sore muscle or something like that. I certainly wouldn't want to create a problem for them. But I can also understand the other side of the discussion, which is that um, you run the risk of people using things that they shouldn't be using on school grounds. And it, without testing whatever the material is, you don't really know for sure what's in it.
Mhm.
So, Terry?
Um, that's a good point about the students. Uh, there is a concern about young folks using uh, ointments or anything for their sport activity. But there are CBD products that don't have THC, but I don't know how effective those are for what they might need. But they really shouldn't be using that stuff because that stuff is really powerful with the THC. So I'm for one, for that alternate language.
Okay. Um, Juanita, do you have a particular position? It sounds like you preferred the second paragraph.
I preferred the second, in response to the sports or anything else. I think somewhere in the policy it did say that we would take into consideration like a doctor's prescription, um, or a doctor's recommendation or suggestion if there's a medical reason.
Would that apply in a case like this, Kim?
So I'm thinking about it not so much in the student context as in the employment context, because we do have people that will on occasion come forward with a medical certification, and we kind of treat that like a disability, honestly. So we would assess it the same way. So I think we probably, if we had a medical note, we would run that through the nursing staff, for, like a 504 or some kind of appropriate accommodation.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we don't permit, I don't believe we permit students to carry, over the counters of any kind in school, correct?
Only with really explicit approval by a school nurse. So for example, there could be a situation in which a student needed medication. Usually this applies to older students and they have to show that they understand the use of it or using it appropriately. And then with the explicit consent and approval of the nurse, it is permissible in limited circumstances. But typically all medication is dispensed by the school nursing staff.
Okay, so I think that's go ahead, Kim.
I was just gonna say, I think when it becomes an issue, again, like in the employment context, is if someone's visibly impaired, if someone's selling, and those would all be handled by your disciplinary code.
Okay. So given that conversation and sort of putting it in context about the way that we handle medication on the whole, whether it's legal or illegal, I'm inclined to go with Juanita's suggestion of the second paragraph, Terry, unless you have a strong feeling.
No, I agree. I agree.
Okay. So we will adopt that alternate language for the use of CBD products, that second paragraph. Thank you. Now, moving back up that policy and looking at the medical marijuana portion of the policy specifically, and comparing that to the language in the box there. Juanita, did you want to comment on any of that? You started to talk about it previously, so.
No, I do like the alternate language, and I think it should be considered.
The alternate language really doesn't change the essence of the policy. I think it just expands it to make sure that people are aware that this applies, school bus, after school activities, off school grounds, those types of things. And I do think that that's important. Because we have seen some situations where, if it's not inside the four walls of the school, that it's still not appropriate in the educational context.
Thank you, Kelly. If we were to adopt the alternate language, would that replace the entirety of the content above it, or would it be in addition to that content?
My understanding is the CABE recommendation is in addition.
In addition, okay.
So it would just list as kind of the final paragraph of this section.
Committee members, is that agreeable?
I agree with what, I agree.
I agree.
Non-committee members, any feedback on this particular portion of the policy?
No.
I'm fine with it.
Okay. In that case, we will adopt the policy and we will include the alternate language at the bottom on medical marijuana. And we will also include that second paragraph as noted on the use of CBD products. And I am looking for a recommendation from the committee for first read of policy 5131.6, students, alcohol use, drugs, and tobacco, including performance enhancing substances.
So moved.
Second,
Thank you. Thank you, Terry. Motion is on the floor. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Motion carries. All right. We're now going to look at policy 5131.7, weapons and dangerous instruments, please.
So this one links as well with your discipline code. This is just very explicit to the types of things that are classified as a dangerous instrument and or weapon. And again, speaks to they're not permissible on school grounds, after school activities, school related or school sponsored events and so forth. And really tries to emphasize the point that anything that could be used to harm others is considered a weapon in our school discipline code. So I think it's pretty explicit, but certainly open to questions if anyone has any.
What's the difference?
The difference between this policy and others?
Yeah, or the one in 2003.
It is, so if you look, let me just share, give me 1 second, sorry. It really further specifies this paragraph right here.
Oh, okay.
Spells out kind of the different kinds of potential weapons. And the other section that is optional is this alternate language, which can be utilized as well. That is more explicit or specific than the previous policy. However, in my opinion, it does not change the essence of the policy. It's just really bringing some of the language up to speed.
Thank you, Kelly. Committee members, feedback on this particular policy, including understanding of that alternate language in the center there. And then there is additional optional language to consider at the bottom. I think especially when you look at that additional optional language to consider, weapons under the control of law enforcement personnel are permitted. The superintendent may authorize other persons to possess weapons for courses, programs, and activities approved by the district and conducted on district property. I think that that's also important in terms of, if you have somebody that comes in to do a demonstration, or if one of our career pathways, for example, makes use of something that could be construed as a weapon, is not intended to be a weapon, but could be construed as one. This would give us space to allow the use of or the demonstration of that item.
So the alternate language would replace the top two, or
So
in addition?
So if are we looking at the part that Kate just went over? This would be an addition at the end. So this would just be tacked on to the bottom. So it's additional language. If you are looking at the one up above, alternate language, you can either do the first 2 paragraphs in the policy, or this a little bit more explicit section with the alternate language, one or the other.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Ah,
Do we want to start with maybe the top section of, do we like these first 2 paragraphs? Or would we prefer to use the alternate language, which would be this section here?
My personal preference is for the one that spells out the different types of weapons. I think the more explicit that we can be with people about what they can and cannot bring in school, the easier it's going to be for them to understand. You know, obviously there is a benefit to having blanket language that covers sort of anything, but I think, you know, if somebody reads, okay, I can't bring this type of knife, this type of knife, this type of knife, this type of knife. If they have a knife, they're not going to bring it to school because they're going to look at this and think, this is going to get me in trouble. Whereas if we just say anything that could be used as a weapon, and somebody comes to school with a box cutter because to them that's a tool and it's not a knife, right? They're not thinking in their head it's a knife, they're thinking it's a tool. You're more likely to have somebody show up in that kind of circumstance because it doesn't explicitly say don't bring a knife to school. Terry?
Um, thinking back about what happened at Pembroke, do we want to just say by a student?
So these are student policies. So we already went over faculty policies, and off the top of my head, I do not recall, but it is not permissible by anyone on school grounds. But this particular policy, this 5,000 series section, is all around students. And so this language is focused around them explicitly.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
But I'm fine with the top 2. The top 2 paragraphs and the alternate at the end. Or the additional, excuse me, the additional or optional language at the end. Juanita, I don't know.
So I think that the more explicit we can be, the better. And so I think that we have to keep in there the actual description of what we are talking about. So I agree with keeping the first 2 paragraphs. I wouldn't be opposed to including the alternate language also.
Do you mean the alternate language at the top, or do you mean the additional optional language at the bottom?
Okay, let me go down to the bottom. Oh, no, that's. So do you see what's highlighted right now?
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I clicked too quickly. This right here. Is that what you're referring to?
I think that, now, hear me out. I just think that the whole thing, all of it has to be kept in.
So you're suggesting keep the alternate language at the top in as well.
Right.
Because these 3 paragraphs right here, the alternate language, is intended to be, do you want the first 2 paragraphs or the next 3? And then I would recommend that you keep this explicit, the possession or use of weapons, kind of down below the highlighted part. That just refers you back to the suspension expulsion policy. But I'm not sure if you need all 5 of the beginning paragraphs. I think you could pick the first 2 or the other 3.
Committee members, what are your thoughts between the first two paragraphs versus the next three?
Whatever the committee wants, it's okay with me.
Um, I'd like to stick with the first two. As far as the alternate language, the first paragraph, do we need to have separate definition from dangerous and deadly?
I think we're talking about either keeping the first two paragraphs, Juanita, or the three paragraphs that start where alternate language comes in.
So I
So,
don't want the other three.
so you prefer to keep the first two?
Yes.
Okay, that would be my preference as well. I think the more that we make these concrete objects instead of definitions, the easier it's going to be to convey the message.
Mhm.
Okay. Before we take a look for a motion on this, I just want to check with my non-committee members. Do you have any feedback on this particular policy?
I just want to ask Kelly a question because if we're talking about weapons and including stuff. Remember, we had the expulsion hearing with the young man that his religion, he bought, he could bring the sword into school. It's not called a sword, but he could bring that to school every day.
It was a Kirpan. It was a Kirpan.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yep. And it actually, yeah, it caused us to spend a lot of time thinking about how we would recognize religious
Uh-huh.
expression in the context of these kind of policies. So I think even with these changes, you could make these as difficult or draconian as you want. You would still have to enter into that religious accommodation idea when presented with something like that.
Okay.
Ooh,
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
did you see in London, they're prohibiting ninja swords,
Are they?
machetes, because they're knifing attacks are out of control.
Yeah.
I should say England. I think it's all of England.
Mhm.
Any other questions or concerns about this policy? All right, seeing none, I'm going to look for a motion from the committee to recommend to the board for first read, policy 5131.7, weapons and dangerous instruments. Is there a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Terry. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Juanita. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, thank you so much. We're going to move on to the final policy on the agenda here, 5132, dressing and grooming.
So this talks about all about dress code expectations, and essentially it talks about allowing students to maintain freedom of expression and so on and so forth, and being sensitive to that, but also drawing the line that it cannot be offensive, overtly offensive to others. It cannot interfere with the educational process. So it does give your school or building leadership teams the ability, should they run into a situation in which something could be inappropriate or offensive, something like that, to request that the individual, modify that.
Committee members, any feedback on this?
So if a trans woman student, trans girl student dressed appropriately, would there be a problem?
So under this, it's saying that no restrictions on the freedom of dress. So you can choose to dress in any way that you so choose. You cannot interfere with someone's, civil rights, their religious rights, their style, their taste. And that's all right here. So if someone that was born, let's say as male, chooses to dress as female, that is within their rights to do so.
Is that a state thing that we have now? Is that under state statute?
Well, it's anybody's guess at the, yes, it exists under state law. It's anybody's guess kind of what's happening with the federal law.
I agree.
And
Okay,
And here I'll just, the restrictions are really to the three buckets that it's unsafe. So, for example, if we saw an elementary school student that was wearing something that could cause, them to trip or get harmed or something like that, we would intervene. It's disruptive, or it's contrary to law.
Can I interject?
Sure.
Sure, go ahead, Juanita.
So basically, this is not a dress code. It is really comes down to safety. And so therefore, what we're calling appropriate to the school situation really is not, we can't really, we can't judge that. And I guess we're really saying in the second sentence, the primary responsibility for a student's attire resides with the student and their parents and guardians. And ours is really all about safety.
Mhm.
Do you agree, disagree?
I agree with you.
Oh, okay, so I have no objection to the wording that is in here.
me neither.
Non-committee members, any feedback on this particular policy?
No, I'm
Uh,
fine. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you very much. I'm looking for a motion from the committee to recommend first read by the full board for policy 5132, dressing and grooming, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Juanita.
Second,
Thank you, Terry. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
aye.
Motion so carries. Kelly, do you want to just sort of reiterate a little bit about how things are moving forward with our May policy meeting, since we're going to be very specific with that one?
Sure.
Thank
So before July 1st, we have to have this school climate policy. So it is a model policy, which I will put the agenda together and share out. I think it'll be important to go through it pretty explicitly. We as a cabinet team are still trying to go through all the different, as there's going to be a lot of requirements for school buildings to create that, to further build upon what we're already doing to create that safe school climate and culture for all students and staff. So we'll go over that policy in the May meeting. It is a recommendation that this policy in its entirety replace the existing bullying policy, as the bullying legislation is kind of folded in along with a big broader scope to all situations of safety. So that will be what we'll be going through. I would encourage prior to that meeting for everyone to read through the policy, and I'll make sure to get it out well in advance so that you can just familiarize yourself and have questions so we can walk through it together.
Thank you, Kelly. Committee members, any questions about that? I mean, we're going to be able to discuss this in pretty significant detail when it does come forward to us in May, so I don't want to get into the weeds here, but if you have any more general questions about how that's going to work, we'll certainly welcome you to ask them now. All right, seeing none, I am looking for, oh, Terry, go ahead.
I want to go back to 5114. Can I do that?
We can have a
just-
conversation about it. The vote has taken place, but we can have a
Right,
conversation.
right. The vote has taken place. I just want clarification on that page 7 about exclusion from co-curricular and extracurricular activities. Is that's what replacing 5114.21? It's C, exclusion from co-curricular and extracurricular activities. Is that what is replacing the old thing about for 5114.21?
Just give me a second. I'm trying to find where you are. This policy is recommended to replace the former 5114. I have to double check what the 5114.21 was. Give me
That
one.
was the one we voted to get rid of?
Oh, yes, that's correct. At the last policy meeting. Yes, this policy is broad and includes the extracurricular as well. Yes, thank you.
It's too broad.
You think?
I just think, I really didn't want the other one. I even asked Henry Abbott for their policy, and it's a page. A page length. I just think we should have something specific, more specific, let's put it that way.
So
May I
ways-
ask, go ahead, sorry.
Oh,
Sorry,
I'm so
Kelly.
sorry. No, I was just gonna say a way that we could handle that is we did consult with the, it is not a required policy for, this is 5114 is required, but the 0.21 is not required. And so, you know, your building administrators can give discipline if a student is out for a day. That applies to those extracurricular, and they felt that that is very clear in practice. They're also trying to balance holding kids accountable for actions without being overly punitive for things that motivate and engage students in school. So your secondary building administrators felt strongly that this policy did kind of encompass the current work, and there was not a need for another additional policy. We can certainly revisit it in the future. Or another option would be to look to add regulations to this that could be tweaked and changed a little bit more easily, which would give maybe a little bit more explicit direction to the extracurriculars if we so chose.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Kate.
No problem.
Put my mind at ease. Thank you.
Good.
There's always a fix.
Yeah, they're always a fix.
All right, I'll make one last call. Is there anything else anybody is concerned about or wants to discuss about what was on the agenda this evening? All right, I'm not going to take that silence to go any further. So may I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Terry. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Juanita. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate